Hey everyone, this is Chris Miller and you're listening to the EduMind Podcast. If you're an architect, project manager, or a nurse, or maybe you're just curious about these career paths, then our podcast is one that you're not going to want to miss. Each week, we'll be talking to subject matter experts, course instructors, and other special guests to bring you the latest and greatest in architecture, project management, and nursing, and a whole lot more. Now, let's dive in. Some of your favorite architecture media, and then also if we can get into some continuing education. So we're covering a wide spectrum of things today. So I'm glad to have you, Nathan. So let's dive in. So when did you start taking your ARE exams?
I graduated from University of Michigan in 2008 and then had a Texas license right before the close of 2010. So that period from 2008 to 2010 was IDP and professional experience and stuff. It was a little tricky at the time because Colorado didn't offer concurrency. So you had to finish your IDP hours before you were eligible to take the exams. Oh. Texas did allow concurrency, but there was no residency or practice requirement. So my initial license and registration was in Texas because I was impatient and didn't really want to wait. In the subsequent years, I want to say 2011, maybe 2012, Colorado did change the legislation, state legislation, and concurrency then was allowed. So fewer people now are doing that sort of Texas-Colorado trade and will generally register in Colorado initially.
Oh, very nice, very nice. So sometimes not being patient pays off, right?
It's true.
So, I'm tend to not be a very patient person either. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes, gets me in my feet into a little bit of hot water, but it's all right. So, when it comes to, preparing and studying, everyone kind of has their own formula for success. Sometimes people will reach out to others and see what their formula was and maybe try to mimic their path and their journey while they prepare. And then others kind of like to go rogue and, study on their own and create, their own formula for success. So, while you were preparing for the ARE, besides material, what are some of the methods maybe along with the materials that you found to be successful in helping you prepare for the exams?
I didn't find a whole lot locally that was very helpful. And shortly after that licensure period, so early 2011, I got fairly heavily plugged into the local AIA chapter. And their director of programs at the time became a good friend of mine. She was great. Did a lot of really good work for programs for established professionals. But I was pretty brutally honest with her and told her that their offerings for associates and newly licensed were pretty terrible. So we worked really closely together to try and figure out how we could put a program together that I would have found helpful. We visited San Francisco. Was a particularly helpful trip because we talked to some people that had established a program out there that was successful. It wasn't exactly what I had in mind, but it was a good template. And ultimately, we put together a program here in Colorado that we called ARE ASAP. And essentially what it was designed to do was to give somebody a 6-month rolling cycle that they could plug into in January. And we structured a number of in-person classes and had a ton of resources that were published along with people that were offering in-person instruction. And the program would run January through July, January through June, and then would restart again in July through December. And at the time, there was a 6-month waiting period for an exam. So for an example, if you were to take site planning in January, one of two things, either you were successful or you were not. If you weren't, you moved on. February 1st, you would take construction documents and services. If your unsuccessful attempt in January, that course would repeat again in July when you were then re-eligible for the exam. We ran that program for, I forget if it was 7 or 8 years. I mean, in total, we had 1,000, 1,200 people over that period that enrolled. And our success rate for licensure over that 12-month period for each year that we offered was somewhere between 80 and 85%. It was I was very, very proud of what we put together. And that ran through the transition from 3.2 to 4.0. They are still doing a version of that program. I'm much more plugged into the university now than I am with some of the local ARE education stuff, but it felt good at the time, and it feels great now to think back on the successes of that program. And it was a good model for a number of different states regionally that either sent students to us because they didn't have the population to justify doing one themselves, or would use us as a model for something that they would kind of tailor to more local sensibilities. That's what would have worked well for me, and since it didn't exist, we made one.
That's pretty cool, and that's an impressive success rate as well. So definitely take some pride in creating that and seeing it through. That's pretty neat. You know, a lot of times as you're studying, you may find that your approach isn't working, or you need to make some twists and tweaks to it. So was there anything, I know you were saying there's resources were kind of limited when you were preparing. Did you find any resources that just weren't helpful?
The forums that were available at the time, and there are still versions of those that have been distributed in different places, they would list often a reading list. And actually, NCARB would publish a list of suggested reading resources, and those are still available. They've changed a little bit over the years, but something in particular, that mechanical and electrical equipment for buildings book that was always touted as the resource for the building systems exam. That's conservatively 2,500 pages.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's not a resource. It's not a useful resource unless you tell people where to look. And it was the same thing with Architect's Handbook of Professional Practice. Any of those texts that people would have used in school for a professional practice class or environmental technology, it would have been listed as the textbook. When you have an entire semester dedicated to a subject, a text makes sense. But when you have 4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks, and that particular text is one of several that are being suggested as resources, I always felt that it was much more helpful to give people chapters, sections, paragraphs, sentences that they should pay attention to in those 2,500 pages. And I think that was always my biggest frustration, is someone would think, oh, I'm being very helpful. I'm giving you this resource that's going to take you a year to get through.
Right.
So capitalizing on my experience or my time in the book to help people cut down on their time, to find the stuff that's useful, to find the stuff that I know is going to show up. We were always very specific in, look at this chapter, not this one, save this for a particular exam, because it's just not reasonable to ask somebody to charge through thousands of pages for a particular exam section. There's just not enough time.
No, I agree. And sometimes I think people have a hard time maybe realizing or separating that, there's a difference between a college course class and an exam prep. A semester is 16 weeks. So you have the time to go through a textbook, as opposed to, some of these boot camps, like, we offer boot camps. For example, for PMP, we have a 5-day boot camp. I'm not giving you 1,000 pages to go through, because by the time you get to the 5th day, you're like, wow, I'm still reading this book. Yep. So, and I think it applies on both sides. I think, when you have people that are teaching it, there's a learning curve as well. Like if you're used to teaching a college course, maybe teaching an exam prep takes a little while for you to kind of get the reins. And then on the flip side for students as well, getting out of that mindset of, oh yeah, I got 16 weeks to learn this material, as opposed to, I got, 4 weeks. So absolutely, what might be considered a resource for one avenue is definitely not suited for the other. So when it comes to just education as a whole, over the last 2 years, we've seen a lot of changes, right? COVID has totally flipped education on its other side. It used to be everything was about on-site, face-to-face. You had to be in the same room in order for you to fully grasp. At least that's what people thought, right? In order for you to fully learn, you need to be in that same environment. But when COVID came, everything kind of got pushed remote, not just for work, but also for learning. College classes went hybrid, or they went entirely online.
Yep.
And so things kind of went nutty, but people have adapted like we always do. People adapt and they learn. So I think the whole idea of virtual learning is more accepted now, both from the instruction side and also from the learner side. So, how do you expect maybe, or what are your thoughts on how preparing for these exams are going to change in the near future? Whether, I know a lot of people don't do on-site classes anymore, but, what are your thoughts on how you think maybe the exam process or the studying process is going to change?
We've had exactly that discussion locally because Colorado is geographically challenged, and maybe not as much so as Montana is particularly bad. And I don't mean bad in it. Well, it is negative. Montana is tough because there are small population centers, and their associate group is spread out across the state. So if you have smaller satellite communities where you have one or two people that might be studying for the entire exam cycle and not necessarily for the same section, it is very difficult to provide useful resources to those people that are located remotely. And Colorado has the same challenge. We're very much Denver focused, which is not great for Grand Junction on the western slope. It's not great for people that are on the eastern Colorado-Kansas border. So years ago, we would record our classes. And it was before Zoom was a thing, but there were other tools that were doing similar things. And we would have people call in so that they could hear and they could see the content. Couple cameras that were set up so that one was focused on me, one was focused on the whiteboard. We didn't necessarily have a digital whiteboard, but the whiteboard was represented through a video feed, all that stuff stitched together. And those classes for each section were available on AIA Colorado's website for people to pull down, for people to download. And at every board meeting or quarterly discussion with the education group, we would plug in and see where people were requesting this information from. And it was broad. We'd have people from remote Washington State. We'd have people from Vermont, New Hampshire, and they've got access to that entire East Coast corridor. But we're still remote enough that they were looking for online options, online opportunities. So when the university very suddenly went remote in that 2020, like February, March 2020 timeframe, the dean and other people associated with kind of upper management of the college were really scrambling to figure out how we were going to do this. And they were asking the right questions of the right people to try and figure out how we were going to put something together literally over the course of a spring break, because students left, went on break, and didn't come back. Right. We had to figure out a way to finish the semester. And a lot of the tools that we had used years previous to help remotely located students with useful education content, all of those tools came back, and we were familiar enough with how to leverage them that we ended up, I think, with a semester that was as successful as it could be, given the immediacy of those circumstances.
Yeah, no, I feel you. I remember when, the COVID first started, affecting the schools. My son was in seventh grade. You're right. He went to spring break and they never went back.
And that was it.
And, they go from going to class every day to all of a sudden now the schools are scrambling, right? They don't know what to do. So what they started doing was, we'll send you these links. You watch these recordings, or, we'll try to see if we can't teach online using, Google Classroom or something like that. And it was a disaster. The remainder of that seventh grade or whatever year everyone else happened to be in, it was a disaster, right? And then the summer comes and people are still not knowing, like, holy cow, what's the next year going to be like? And then it was completely remote until the last month of school, and they made progress. They learned a lot from what they weren't doing or what they were doing wrong the previous year, and they implemented, which was great. For us, we were pretty lucky in the sense that we were already running live online classes.
Yeah.
So only thing that really got affected for us was our on-site classes didn't happen, but those students transitioned online, and we've been doing online classes since 2007. So we were pretty lucky in the sense that we already had tools and processes in place to make it easy. And it's funny is because, on-site classes used to be what everybody was asking for. Hey, we've got to have on-site. But now they're used to it. I don't know if it's because they're working remote, and so they've kind of learned to, not be in the same environment as their coworkers. And so online is definitely picked up. So, but yeah, like you had said, a lot of colleges, I mean, they were like scrambling on what to do.
Yeah.
And so hopefully now that things are back to some kind of normalcy, you see the on-sites happening again, and then online learning is not so scary for a lot of people anymore. And heck, even working remote, taking meetings, people aren't too freaked out anymore. They're like, oh, we can do this via Teams or Zoom. So it's kind of cool. My last question on the exam prep is, we talk about, experience hours and things like that. So what was your experience gaining your AXP hours?
We talked about this briefly the last time you and I had a discussion. I got very lucky with I'll say it was the right firm with the right project at the right time. So that workout at the Department of Energy site that's here in Golden, the National Renewable Energy Lab, the architecture firm was supporting the equivalent of, the contractor called it a rolling 40. So they would bring in one crew that would work 4 10s. And then Wednesday was the overlap day. So they would have 2 crews on site on a Wednesday. And then that second crew would do another 4 10-hour days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So when you have essentially twice the amount of construction labor that's being supported by the same amount of design and admin staff, the ratio of the amount of time required for design and admin, goes through the roof, which was great. My partner was traveling for work at the time. We didn't have any kids. I didn't have any dogs. It just, in the most responsible way possible, take advantage of the amount of information and just sort of energy that was available at the office. So if I was to look back at average hours in a week, it was consistently somewhere between 70 and 80 hours for a 2.5-year, 3-year period. I don't recommend it. I don't know that it was necessarily the most responsible thing, but when everything counts towards experience categories, I was done with IDP in less than 2 years, which is why that the Texas concurrency opportunity was so attractive, because there was an opportunity to compress all of that stuff in a considerably shorter time period than would have been normal. And January 2011 comes along, and I have a Texas license in hand. I applied for Colorado. It was certainly a goal, and it was a goal that I was able to accelerate because of that project that I was staffed on at the time. The hours, what we do with interns here at the office is generally take a look at how they come in. So are you coming in with 0? Are you coming in with a certain percentage? Look at the projects that we have in the pipeline, in the backlog, and try and understand what somebody might be interested in working in. Because I can look at somebody's experience stack and say, okay, you're set on CDs because that's the easiest one. Most of these people are doing production work for us. But if we have really interesting project types that are under construction, and I can take them to a site visit for a performing arts complex, higher and home, some other type of education component that might be at a STEM-focused charter school or something. Maybe they're not billing on those particular projects. They're not contributing to the team, but my responsibility as an educator, as a mentor, as a senior associate here is to get them exposure to as much as I can when it's available. Because 6 months from now, we may not have anything under construction, and they go back to those more documentation-focused roles. So I like to kind of take that balanced approach. What are you interested in? But what do I have that I think is useful based on my interpretation of your experience record? And kind of tracking those discussions. I hear that our people are generally happy with how that experience track runs. And it works well. I think that kind of broad exposure approach for us works really well.
Yeah. Sounds like a pretty streamlined process, and it seems to, like you said, it seems to keep people happy and get them to their end goal, which is great. As I was looking through our questions for today, I came across this next section. I'm like, favorite architecture media. I'm like, that's going to be kind of interesting because, heck, media has changed so much, right? I remember when I used to go every day to buy a LA Times paper. I sit down, I read the sports paper or sports section, I read the news section, and you're flipping the pages.
Yep.
And then now I'm like, holy cow, I don't remember the last time I bought a newspaper. Everything's digital now. I mean, I get the LA Times delivered through the app every day. So, and also, over the years, I guess the popularity and maybe media types have changed. I mean, you've seen, podcasts, blogs have become pretty popular as well. So my question is, so what architecture podcast do you tune into on a regular basis?
The podcasts that I listen to regularly, anything on the TED stage, whether it is like a true TED or TEDx, which is some of the more local stuff. And then NPR's partnership with, I think what they're calling the TED Radio Hour. Mm-hmm. Those are generally rebroadcasts, but they're done in a way that I just find kind of interestingly consumable. Because I think they tend to ask questions that might spin some thoughts in different directions that didn't necessarily come out of those initial conversations. So I do love all of that TED media. I've been for years a huge fan of 99% Invisible. It's a Buckminster Fuller quote or a permutation thereof where 99% of design work, design thought, design participation is invisible. It's kind of stuff that's happening behind the scenes. Roman Mars is, and I'm sure there are others that are responsible for the content, but he's kind of the name that's attached to that particular podcast. And I love that one, love it. And it's not always architecture focused, but it is always design or design adjacent focused. And that's another great one. There are a handful that are produced locally, whose names are going to escape me at the moment. I mean, as far as media consumables, I do love a physical paper. So the office here, we get the New York Times delivered 5 days a week. And then at home, I do get the weekend versions. I get Saturday, Sunday. I love a good Wall Street Journal. That's typically digital, but the office does get a paper copy. Our local paper, there aren't multiples anymore. Rocky Mountain News is no longer a thing, but Denver Post is good for the local content. And then we've got a local version of the Real Estate Journal. So Denver Real Estate Journal or the Denver Business Journal. Those are more so that I can keep myself in tune with what's happening locally, who do I need to be talking to, what developers are establishing a presence in the local market, what sold to who do I need to interface with in Texas, because Texas firms are establishing footholds in our local market here. I think that probably rounds out the biggest ones. Yeah. There are certainly others, but yeah.
I'm with you. I mean, podcasts are a great way to get information maybe in an entertaining fashion. They're huge. But I also agree with you in the sense that I like to touch that newspaper still, get the ink on the hands. They're just sometimes harder to find. Like, I can't get a physical copy of the LA Times out here in Columbus. But whenever I go out there, I'm like, okay, I can either read it on my phone or I go pick one up out of the newspaper machine. You throw in $1 and you get a paper. So I like the physical thing. And also when it comes to books, I'm not a big ebook fan. I like to have the physical book to be able to turn the pages. I don't know. It's just something about I don't know if it's because I'm old and that's what I'm used to, or I don't know. Are you also feel that way too when it comes to reading a book?
So both personally and professionally, I do keep. I keep one hell of a library, and it's architecture and design certainly, although a lot of that stuff are office resources, and I don't buy 2 copies of one thing. I have a ridiculous collection of cookbooks personally that I love, but at the office, books for us are important because you can leave them out. Right. It's hard to leave an iPad out that has a particular image on it. Battery doesn't last, it wants to turn off, but a collection of books for a particular precedent study are always out on our big break table. And it's I think it keeps us not only current. The most recent one that came through was Lake Flato's, I'll call it a monograph on all of their residential projects. So Lake Flato houses. I mean, it's beautiful. The work is just incredible work. but to look at what they're doing currently, some of the more recent stuff, but all of the historic stuff that's also included, showing their entire canon of residential work. The blogs aren't publishing the stuff that's 20 years old.
Mm-hmm.
The newspapers aren't publishing the stuff that's 20 years old. And to be able to look at those projects that are older and to see how their work has progressed or not. In the case of something like, I don't know, Olsen Kundig's residential projects, there are recurring themes in those that they have been investigating and refining for 25 years. And to be able to look at that thread in a single volume, there is no digital equivalent. So yeah, I do, and we do. We love our books, big, heavy, thick books.
Well said. But now I'm a little sidetracked. You said you spoke about you mentioned cookbooks. So now I'm just thinking food. So, we're kind of towards the end of the podcast, so I think we can kind of sidetrack here a little bit. So now I got to ask you, is there a favorite cuisine that you like to cook?
So I'm vegetarian, but I do enjoy, my partner's not, we entertain a lot. So that I don't only cook the vegetables, but favorite cuisine, currently I am deep into Indian. Which it has been a lot of fun. I mean, it's kind of fundamentally changes what spices are at the front of your rack and all of that good stuff. So I'll separate kind of cooking from baking. I just had a birthday, what's today, Wednesday, so it was Monday. So I brought something into the office and we did a sort of a cake and shake happy hour at 4:30. I love to bake. Pi Day's coming up, so 3.14, March 14th. It's a huge day for pie in the office. P-I-E, not P-I.
What are you going to bake?
We took a survey and it's looking like strawberry rhubarb, which is a bit of a challenge because rhubarb's out of season.
Yeah.
One of the principals would likely fire me if I didn't bring him a pecan pie. So we've got that one on the list. There's always some version of an apple. So yeah, we'll do 4 or 5 coming up here in a couple weeks. It's Indian is the current obsession, and there's always something crazy that I'm baking. Whether it's multi-step or if it's bread recipes that I've got sourdough starters that are 20 some years old from people that have contributed mothers that we've been feeding for a number of decades. Yeah, it's this fantastic mix of like understood science, just absolutely crazy alchemy and art kind of all crammed together.
No, you couldn't have said it better. I mean, your sourdough's tough. I mean, without a great starter, you got nothing. But no, you're absolutely right. It's funny is like EduMind or School of PE, they're owned by Vinod, who's from India, and so we have an office over there. And before COVID, I was going there once a year, and holy cow, the food's incredible, but it has a kick like nothing I've ever seen before. So rich and deep in spices, but they like it hot.
True.
So no, I'm with you on that. And also, there's a lot of great vegetarian dishes. So I'm sure you've probably dabbled with quite a few. Heck, we could have a podcast just on the architectural preferences for food types.
And there's a thing here in town. So architecture, fashion, design, food, all of those different local communities, there's a lot of cross-pollination. So restaurants will pair with local design firms and you will design a dessert essentially. So you do see these really incredibly sort of delicate cake structure things that become part of a restaurant's menu for a specific period of time. The local interior design group at IIDA sponsors a fashion event that architecture typically gets pulled into. So wearable fashion out of architectural materials. So how do you make a dress out of wood flooring? I mean, that kind of stuff, those opportunities, I mean, we're not unique in that those things happen in our city. They happen in all the really good metros that are trying to encourage that cross-pollination between each one of these different design disciplines. And those are great. Those are really good opportunities for people to get to know people outside of their own discipline, but think about a design problem through a non-traditional lens, which ultimately just makes us better at our jobs and more interesting people, maybe.
No, I agree. That's pretty cool, actually. We have come to the end today. I appreciate you coming out here. We covered some great topics. Talked about preparing for the ARE. We touched on some architecture media. We got into my favorite thing, which is food. Definitely love to have you back, Nathan. So I'll reach back out to you. We'll get you back on here. I'm sure the audience is probably thinking, I wonder what pie is going to be the most popular one for Pie Day. So maybe we can touch on that the next time you're back in. So for everyone else, have a great rest of the week. Nathan, thanks so much for coming back for episode 2, and I'll see you for round 3 here shortly.
Very good. It's good to talk to you.
You too.